If you have children or you're thinking about starting a family, this video could be the most important one you'll ever watch, because I'm going to teach you the single technique that Carl Jung considered essential for raising a psychologically healthy child. A technique so simple it seems obvious, yet 95% of parents get it wrong without even realizing it. And the mistake isn't born out of bad intentions, it's born out of a lack of awareness, out of unconsciousness. Jung spent decades studying how the human psyche takes shape in the early years of life, and he arrived at a conclusion that should be taught in every parenting course. The majority of adult psychological problems, including narcissism, stem from a single flaw in childhood, a flaw that parents commit believing they're doing the right thing. Hold on tight, because what comes next could change how you raise your children. The technique that Jung taught has a technical name. He called it appropriate emotional mirroring, but I'm going to translate that into simple language, because it's crucial that you understand it. When a baby is born, it doesn't know who it is. It has no sense of self, no notion of where it ends and the world begins. And in the first months and years of life, it discovers who it is through one single way, by looking into the eyes of its parents. The parent's face functions as a psychological mirror. The child looks at its mother, its father, and sees reflected there who it is. If the mother looks with love, the child understands, I am worthy of love. If the father looks with joy when the child appears, the child understands, my existence brings joy. This sounds simple, but it's the foundation of all developmental psychology. And here's where most parents go wrong. The mirror needs to reflect the child, not what the parents want the child to be, not what the parents need the child to be, not the expectations, frustrated dreams, or projections of the parents, the real child, as he or she is. But what happens in most families? Parents, unconsciously, use the child as a mirror for themselves. Instead of reflecting who the child is, they project onto the child who they want him or her to be, and the child, who depends completely on its parents for survival, does the only thing it can do. It molds itself to fit the projection, and at that moment, the child's true self begins to die, and a false self begins to be born. Jung called this the primary narcissistic wound. The child learns that it isn't loved for who it is, but for what it represents to the parents. It learns that to receive love, it needs to be what the parents want it to be. And that's the seed of narcissism. Hold on to that, because it will make sense when I show you how to avoid this mistake. Let me give you concrete examples of how parents project instead of mirror. The first example is the father who wanted to be a doctor but couldn't. He looks at his son, let's call him Mark, and sees in him the opportunity to fulfill his frustrated dream. So he reinforces everything that indicates aptitude for medicine, ignores or discourages everything that doesn't fit that plan. Mark learns that to be loved by his father, he needs to want to be a doctor, and slowly, Mark's real desires disappear, replaced by his father's projection. The second example is the mother who's afraid of being alone. She looks at her daughter, let's call her Emily, and sees in her guaranteed companionship for life. So she subtly discourages independence, makes Emily feel guilty when she wants to go out, creates emotional dependence disguised as love. Emily learns that to be loved, she needs to be always available for her mother, and her own life becomes permanently secondary. The third example is the father who feels inferior and compensates with arrogance. He looks at his son, let's call him David, and sees an extension of himself. David's success is his success. David's failure is his humiliation. So he pressures for performance, harshly criticizes errors, is never satisfied. David learns that his worth depends on achievements and develops the same narcissistic structure as his father. In all these cases, the mirror is distorted. The child doesn't see itself reflected. It sees the needs, fears, and projections of its parents. And that's the origin of narcissism. But don't worry, because now I'm going to teach you exactly how to do things differently. Jung's technique can be summarized in one sentence. See your child as he or she is, not as you want him or her to be. Sounds simple. It isn't. Because to see your child as he or she is, you first need to recognize your own projections. You need to ask yourself, when am I reacting to my child for real? Or when am I reacting to a fantasy I created about who he or she should be? This requires self-awareness. It requires that you know your own shadow, the frustrated dreams you may be projecting, the fears that may be influencing how you treat the child, the wounds from your own childhood that may be repeating themselves. Jung was radical about this. He said that the best thing a parent can do for their child is to work on their own complexes, because unresolved complexes are automatically projected onto the next generation. If you had narcissistic parents, you probably carry wounds that, without awareness, you'll pass on to your children, not because you want to, but because that's how the psyche works. And here's the practical part. There are 5 specific behaviors that protect the child's true self and prevent narcissistic formation. I'll detail each one. The first is validating emotions without trying to fix them. When your child cries, the instinctive reaction is to make the crying stop. Stop crying. It was nothing. You're exaggerating. But when you do that, you're sending a message. Your emotions are a problem. Jung would say that you are teaching the child to repress the feeling function, the same dynamic we explored in the previous video. The alternative is to validate first. You're sad. That must be hurting. I understand that you're angry. You don't need to agree with the behavior, but you need to validate the emotion. Because the emotion is real, regardless of whether you think it's justified. When you validate, you tell your child, your emotions matter. You have the right to feel. And that creates an integrated, not fragmented self. The second behavior is allowing the child to be different from you. This is harder than it seems, especially when the child chooses things you wouldn't choose, interests you don't understand, ways of being that don't match who you are. Jung called this recognizing otherness. The child is not an extension of you. It's a separate being, with its own path of individuation. When you try to force the child to be like you, or like you want it to have been, you are murdering its true self to install a copy of you. The practice is simple but requires humility. When your child demonstrates interest in something you don't value, instead of discouraging it, ask genuinely. Tell me more about it. Why do you like it? I want to understand. You don't need to share the interest. You need to demonstrate that your child's interest is valid, because it's theirs. The third behavior is be never, using love as a reward meant your punishment. Conditional love is the poison. That creates narcissists. I love you when you behave. I love you when you get good grades. I love you when you make me proud. The child learns that love depends on performance and dedicates their entire life, seeking the perfect performance that will finally guarantee unconditional love, but they never achieve it, because conditional love never transforms into unconditional love, no matter what you do. Carl Jung described this as the origin of grandiose narcissism, the person who needs constant external validation because they never received sufficient internal validation. The wound never heals because the inner child is still waiting for their parents to finally love them for who they are. The alternative is to separate love from behavior. You can be irritated with the behavior. You can impose consequences. You can express disapproval. But love can't be on the line. I'm angry with what you did, but I love you all the same. Seems obvious, but how many parents really practice this consistently? The fourth behavior is, don't parentify. Parentification is when the child assumes emotional or practical responsibilities that belong to the parents. It might be the child who has to take care of younger siblings because the parents aren't available. It might be the child who has to console mom or dad during their emotional crises. It could be the child who becomes a confidant for their parents' marital problems. In all these cases, the child loses their childhood. They're forced to be an adult before they're ready. And this creates a deep wound. That manifests in various ways in adult life, including difficulty receiving care, a need to always be strong, and an inability to ask for help. Carl Jung saw parentification as an archetypal inversion. The archetype of the child is to receive care. When this archetype is inverted, the entire psychic structure becomes distorted. The practice is simple. Your adult problems are yours to solve. Your children are not your therapists. Your children are not your caregivers. If you need emotional support, seek it from adults, not from children. The fifth behavior is to celebrate being, not just doing. Most parents celebrate accomplishments. Congratulations on the grade. Congratulations on the goal. Congratulations on the presentation. And that's important. But if you only celebrate doing, you teach them that their worth comes from achievements. The alternative is to celebrate existence. I like spending time with you. You make me happy just by existing. I'm lucky to be your parent, not because you did something, simply because you are who you are. Carl Jung called this unconditional delight, and it's what every child needs to develop an integrated true self. The feeling that their existence, independent of any achievement, is a reason for their parents' joy. Children who receive this become adults who don't need constant external validation because they already know, deep in their psyche, that they are enough as they are. And children who don't receive this spend their entire lives seeking from other people what they never received from their parents. This is the origin of narcissism, and this is how to prevent it. Hold on, because there's one more crucial thing that Carl Jung taught about this. You can't give your child what you don't have. If you never received appropriate emotional mirroring from your parents, you're going to have difficulty offering that to your children, not because you don't want to, but because you don't know what it's like to receive it. You don't have an internal model. That's why Carl Jung insisted that the most important work a parent can do is to work on their own wounds, go to therapy, confront your own shadow, integrate the complexes that you inherited from your parents, because while those complexes are active down and unconscious, they're going to operate automatically. You're going to repeat with your children what was done to you, not by choice, by default. The generational transmission of trauma only stops when someone wakes up and does the work of consciousness. You can be that person, but let me tell you two stories that illustrate this difference perfectly. The first is the story of Ashley. Ashley grew up in a family that seemed perfect on the outside. Present parents, beautiful house, private school. But inside the house, Ashley was constantly compared to Tiffany, the neighbor's daughter. Who's prettier? Who gets better grades? Who's more polite? Ashley learned early on that to be loved, she needed to be the best. Not good enough, the best. And she strived for it. Got the best grades. Got into the best college. Got the best job. But never felt enough. At 35, Ashley had a daughter. And without realizing it, started repeating the pattern. When her daughter got a B+, Ashley asked why it wasn't an A. When her daughter won second place, Ashley pointed out what she needed to get first. Ashley wasn't doing this out of malice. She did it because it was all she knew. That's how love worked in her experience. Love was conditional. Love was earned. Love was deserved through performance. And Ashley's daughter started developing the same patterns. Anxiety, perfectionism, constant feeling of inadequacy. The cycle repeating itself until Ashley went to therapy. Not because of her daughter, because of a severe burnout that left her unable to work for months. And in therapy, Ashley finally saw the projections, saw the patterns, saw that she was doing to her daughter exactly what was done to her. And she cried like she hadn't cried since she was a child. That was the moment the cycle started to break. Ashley learned to validate her daughter, learned to celebrate existence, not just achievement. Learned to say, "I'm proud of you," not for what you do, but for who you are. And Ashley's daughter, with now a teenager, is different. Has anxiety sometimes, sure, but has something that Ashley never had at the same age: the certainty that she is loved, not for what she does, for who she is. The second story is of Ryan. Ryan never wanted to have children. He knew his childhood had been traumatic. Absent father, narcissistic mother, who used Ryan as emotional support since he was 6 years old. Ryan was the confidant, the advisor, the therapist to his mother. And Ryan grew up believing that taking care of others was his function, that his own needs were secondary, that asking for help was weakness. When his wife became pregnant, Ryan panicked. He knew, deep down, that he had no model of how to be a father. His father wasn't there. His mother used him. What could he offer a child? But instead of running away, Ryan did something courageous. Before the baby even arrived, Mark sought therapy, not to fix something broken, but to prepare, to understand his own shadow, before it could be projected onto his child. And Mark worked hard. He confronted the anger he felt towards his absent father. He confronted the confusion he felt about his mother. He learned to recognize when he was parentifying and when he was genuinely caring. When his son was born, Mark was far from perfect, but he was conscious. And that consciousness made all the difference. When his son cried, Mark didn't say, "Stop crying." He said, "I know this is tough, I'm here." When his son wanted to play a game that Mark didn't understand, Mark asked, "Can you teach me how it works?" When his son failed at something, Mark said, "Everyone makes mistakes, that's part of learning." And Mark's son grew up differently, not perfect, no one is, but whole, with an integrated true self, with the ability to feel his emotions without fear, with the certainty that he was loved for existing, not for performing. Mark broke the cycle. These two stories illustrate the two possible paths. The path of Patricia, who unconsciously repeated patterns until the pain forced her to awaken, and the path of Mark, who chose to awaken before repeating. You can choose either one, but the sooner you choose consciousness, the less pain you and your children will carry. But before we delve deeper into these 5 behaviors, let me explain something crucial that Carl Jung discovered about how parental complexes are transmitted. Jung identified that every adult carries what he called a parental imago. This isn't a real memory of your parents. It's an internal image, loaded with emotion, that formed in childhood. And this imago operates unconsciously in everything we do as parents. If your maternal imago is of a critical and demanding mother, you'll tend to become a critical and demanding mother yourself, or be, in an attempt to compensate. You might go to the opposite extreme and become an overly permissive mother. Both are reactions to the complex. Neither is true freedom. True freedom comes only when you make the complex conscious. Jung said that an unintegrated complex acts like an autonomous personality within you. It takes control in moments of stress. You find yourself saying things you swore you'd never say, doing things you swore you'd never do, and then you wonder, where did that come from? It came from the complex, from the unaddressed parental imago. That's why therapy is so important for parents. Not because everyone is sick, but because everyone carries complexes, and unaddressed complexes are automatically projected onto the next generation. The good news is, consciousness changes everything. The simple act of recognizing, I'm reacting from my complex, already reduces its power. You regain the ability to choose, instead of reacting automatically. And here's another crucial concept from Carl Jung that applies directly to parenting: the difference between healthy narcissism and pathological narcissism. Many people don't know, but Jung recognized that a certain amount of narcissism is necessary and healthy. A child needs to feel special. They need a sense of self-worth. That's not a problem. The problem arises when narcissism becomes the only way to regulate self-esteem. Healthy narcissism says, I am valuable, and others are too. Pathological narcissism says, I am valuable, and others exist to confirm my value. And this distortion happens when a child doesn't receive enough unconditional love. They develop a fragile sense of true self that needs constant external validation to maintain itself. Without applause, they collapse. With criticism, they fall apart. Conscious parents raise children with healthy narcissism, children who know they are valuable, who don't need to be better than others to feel good, who can admire without envying, who can receive criticism without falling apart. And it all starts with the emotional mirror you offer in the early years. Now, let's delve deeper into each of the 5 behaviors I mentioned earlier, starting with validating emotions without trying to fix them. Most parents struggle with their children's negative emotions because they struggle with their own negative emotions. Thus, if you grew up learning that sadness is weakness, when your child gets sad and so you feel discomfort, and you try to make the sadness stop, not for your child's sake, but to alleviate your own discomfort. Jung called this the projection of the emotional shadow. The emotions you repressed in yourself become intolerable when you see them in your child. The practice is, at first try to recognize your own reaction. When your child cries and you feel irritation, stop. Ask yourself, where does this irritation come from? It probably comes from your own childhood, from moments when your tears weren't welcomed. Then, breathe. Remember that your child's emotion isn't a problem to solve. It's an experience to validate. And finally, offer presence, not advice when not solutions. Presence. I'm here. It's okay to cry. It's safe to feel this. About allowing the child to be different from you. This challenges parental narcissism more than anything else. Because, deep down, many parents see their children as extensions of themselves. The child's success is their success. The child's failure is their shame. Jung warned that this fusion prevents individuation. The child needs to separate psychologically from their parents to become who they really are. And if the parents resist this separation, the child is trapped between being themselves and losing the parents' love. Many choose the love and lose themselves in the process. The practice is to develop genuine curiosity about who your child is becoming, even if it's someone different from what you expected, even if they make choices you wouldn't make. Your role isn't to mold. It's to support the process of individuation that only the child can conduct. About never using love as a reward or punishment. This sounds simple, but it's extremely difficult in practice because most of us were conditioned exactly like that. We received love when we were good. We lost love when we were bad. And we internalized that love is a currency. Jung saw this as the origin of the false self. The child learns to perform to receive love. And slowly, the performance replaces authenticity. They no longer know who they are beneath the masks they've learned to wear. The practice is to completely separate love from behavior. You can be furious with what your child did. You can impose serious consequences. But at no point should love appear to be at risk. The phrase that heals is, I'll always love you, even when I'm angry, even when you make mistakes. The love doesn't change. And the child who hears this repeatedly grows up knowing that it's safe to be human, that mistakes don't mean loss of love, that they can fail and still be loved. Okay, let's talk about not parentifying your child. Parentification is more common than people realize, and it's often disguised as responsibility or maturity. Oh, what a responsible child, always taking care of their siblings. What a mature daughter, always helping me with my problems. But underneath those compliments is a role reversal. The child is doing the adult's job and paying a huge price for it. Carl Jung viewed parentification as an archetypal violation. The archetype of the child is to be cared for and protected. When that archetype is inverted, the entire psychic structure becomes distorted. The child grows up believing that their value comes from caring for others, that their own needs are a burden, that asking for help is selfish. The practice is simple, but it demands brutal honesty. Ask yourself, am I using my child to meet my emotional needs? Am I making them my confidant? Am I expecting them to solve problems that are my responsibility? If the answer is yes, don't beat yourself up. Acknowledge it and change. Seek out adults to meet your adult needs. Let your child be a child. Now about celebrating the being, not just the doing. This is the most powerful antidote against narcissism. Because narcissism is born from the feeling that existing is not enough. That you need to do something extraordinary to justify your existence. Carl Jung called this an ontological wound. The child who never received unconditional delight carries forever the feeling that something is wrong with their mere existence and spends their life trying to prove otherwise. The practice is to create moments of delight for no reason. Look at your child and say, "I love you." Not because they did something, simply because you were looking at them and felt love. I say, "I'm so lucky to be your dad," or "I'm so lucky to be your mom," not as a reward, but as a spontaneous expression of joy for their existence. Kids who receive this regularly develop an inner security that no external achievement can create. They know, deep down in their soul, that they are enough, and that certainty protects them from narcissism. And here is the most important part of all of this. If you're watching this video and recognize that you didn't receive this from your parents, know that it's not too late. You can do for yourself what your parents didn't do. Carl Jung called this reparenting, the process of offering yourself as an adult what the inner child never received, validating your own emotions, celebrating your own existence, offering unconditional love to yourself. This doesn't replace therapy, but it complements it. And it's something that you can start right now. When you feel shame, instead of criticizing yourself, ask, what does the child inside of me need to hear right now? And then say it out loud if you need to. I love you. You are enough. It's okay to feel this. It sounds weird. It sounds silly. But it works. Because the wounded child inside of you is still waiting for what they never received. And you, the adult, can finally offer it. This is the work. This is the path. Heal the inner child, so you don't wound the outer child. If you've made it this far, you've already taken the first step. Awareness. You are seeing what was once invisible. And that's all that Carl Jung asked, just that people wake up, that they see the patterns, that they choose differently. You can choose differently. Your child deserves a clean mirror, a mirror that reflects who they really are, not who you need them to be, and you are the only one who can offer that. If this content resonated with you, subscribe to the channel. Every week we explore the deep psychology of Carl Jung applied to practical topics that transform lives. And remember, Carl Jung spent his entire life studying the human psyche. He saw thousands of patients, analyzed dreams, myths, religions, entire cultures, and the conclusion he reached was simple. Consciousness heals, not perfection, not Herculean effort, just consciousness. Seeing what was once invisible, naming what was once unnameable, and choosing differently. You don't need to be a perfect parent. Perfection is a narcissistic illusion. You need to be a conscious parent, a parent who recognizes their flaws, who apologizes when they mess up, who keeps trying. That is enough. That is more than most children receive. You're already on the right track. The simple fact that you've watched this far proves it. Until the next video.